All right, we're back. It's another Carolina podcast. Happy New Year, everybody. First, another Carolina podcast of 2020. First time I've seen Wes and Chris since a long time ago. Guys, did y'all have good holidays? And I think y'all both celebrate Christmas. Good Christmases, good Christmas, and good New Year's.
Yeah, we are. we had a good one, I think. I think Chris had a good one, too. And ready to get back to it.
Chris, did you, in fact, have a good one?
I had a great one. Can confirm.
Okay, it was I just didn't want Wes to be speaking on your behalf.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Wes is my agent. we had a good one. It was very busy and very joyful.
Good. Joy and busyness. I know y'all have been busy. Gamecock Central doesn't seem like y'all took any time off for any of the holidays because y'all have been cranking out as much quality content as ever. And we are going to get to some of the fun stuff that y'all did over the holiday, including Teams of the Decade, as we exited the teens and entered the 20s, except for those people that insist that the decade actually starts after this year, but those people are dumb, and I don't like them. So we are going to proceed as if we have entered a new decade, because in fact we have, and a little bit later in the podcast talk about the all-decade football team. But first, some pressing news. Earlier this week, South Carolina had all of its early enrollees, all 10 of them. That's a lot. It's a lot of dudes getting on campus early. There are a few more recruiting notes as Daquan Stewart has decommitted from the Gamecocks. Doesn't sound like it's a huge surprise from anybody involved, anybody that's been following his recruitment. But guys, let's start with those early enrollees. 10 guys. Do you have the list right in front of you for those of you that are wondering who exactly is on campus early for South Carolina?
I don't have it in front of me, but I think we have it in our heads.
Even better.
Luke Doty, quarterback Luke Doty, running back Marshawn Lloyd. Then at defensive back, you've got Dominic Hill and O'Donnell Fortune, linebacker Mo Kaba, offensive line, there's several, Vershawn Lee, Trey Jones, Jason Turnitine, Tyshawn Wanamaker. Who else we got, Wes?
How many did you just name?
I don't know.
I believe that was 9. Wide receiver Mike Wyman.
Mike Wyman was the other one. And also Chuck Strickland, who's a preferred walk-on, right, from Burns High School. Not a scholarship guy, but a preferred walk-on. He actually enrolled early as well, so they're sort of counting him in that group.
So, obviously, the benefits of getting on campus early are numerous. If you had to prioritize them, because, all of a sudden you're getting access to weight rooms and nutrition programs, you're getting, I guess, a little more access to the coaches in a somewhat limited capacity outside of spring ball, which obviously is hugely important. More access to the playbook. Obviously, you're getting to develop a relationship with your teammates. If you had to, put those in some kind of order, what do you think is the greatest benefit of these guys enrolling early?
I think, all of it's a positive because there's so many different things that are thrown at these kids. But if you are narrowing it down, I think it's just getting acclimated from an academic standpoint and a workout standpoint, right? Because, those are the first things. These kids aren't walking straight into practice, They're not arriving on February 26th when they start spring practice. They're not arriving right at the start of preseason camp, which is really, really, that's the most difficult for anybody who gets there right at the beginning of preseason camp. Now they're jumping into school classes. They're jumping into practice without having gone through the summer workouts, without having gone through spring. So for these guys that are arriving in January, have a little bit of time, then they're starting practice, or not practice, they're starting workouts with the staff, and they're getting acclimated from a class standpoint and just a college life standpoint. If you talk to any guys, after they get on campus in media settings, or if you talk to any recruits that maybe are hosted by these guys on visits, things of that nature, you always hear that it's just so much different than high school, and so, whether it's the nature of the workouts, how difficult they are, being on a schedule, I think just getting acclimated to all that's very helpful. And then to be able to go through the winter workouts in January, especially now with a new strength coach and Paul Jackson on board, that gives them a chance to get acclimated to the way things are done. And then you can go into spring ball during your installation. You can go through summer workouts, and you already have a base. So I think that's the biggest thing.
We've seen the number of early enrollees at South Carolina and just across the country go up pretty much every year since the early signing period started, because obviously now it's feasible to do that, because previously you had to wait until February to sign. Where does this end? Are we going to get to a point where all 25 guys in a class are going to sign in the early signing period and enroll in January? Obviously, there's some exceptions. Some high schools don't allow it. But do you think it's heading in that direction, or do you think we've kind of already reached the point where schools will have between 8 and a dozen on the high end, and that's kind of where it's going to settle?
I don't think it'll ever get to the point where everybody does. Because, first of all, you got to be in academic situation to actually do that. You're always going to have some guys that are still finishing up classes, and frankly, some guys that want to finish up classes and want to go through all their senior year stuff. Now, Muschamp did talk about how even if guys enroll early, they're still allowed to go back and go to their prom. They can go walk the stage, all that stuff as well. So I think that helps maybe relieve some of that. But, a lot of these guys are multi-sport players. So, you look at a guy like Tonka Hemingway, he absolutely had the academics where he could have enrolled early if he wanted to, but plays baseball, plays basketball, and didn't want to leave his current teammates. So, I think for the guys that want to do it, it makes a ton of sense. Like Chris said, the acclimation process, it's just so much easier. It's at a pace that I think is more fitting for guys going off to college for the first time, as opposed to just being thrown to the wolves, so to speak. But for the guys that are sort of in on it and that are ready, it's an outstanding situation. Now, if they're not sort of bought in, if they're not quite ready and they want to finish out those things at their current high schools, then I think it makes sense for those guys to wait.
Videos have circulated since Marshawn Lloyd has been on campus now for a couple of days of him backflipping in various locations around South Carolina's campus. I remember we were standing in this very studio when one of you showed me a video of Marshawn Lloyd. I don't know, he was doing some drill at some kind of combine, probably last summer, and I don't know, he ran through an Oklahoma drill or something like that, and at the end of it, he did a backflip, and that's when I realized that I need to learn how to do a backflip. Did y'all know that I learned how to do a backflip this summer after that?
You did?
Yeah.
A gainer or just a backflip?
Just a backflip.
Like off a trampoline or running start? Or
No, I did it on a beach. I didn't show you that video?
No.
Okay. All right, we'll have to show you.
But you're like a gainer, like you're standing there, are you taking any steps? Or?
I mean, I just stood there and just did a backflip.
That's pretty impressive.
I was inspired by Marshawn Lloyd, so I just have to shout out Marshawn. Well, because we were like, oh, that's so impressive. And I was like, wait a second. I can do a backflip. Maybe other people will think I'm that impressive. So I learned how to do it. It was cool.
I wonder if you could do that many and then splice them together on a video.
Definitely not. When he had some cool back handsprings in there too, and it was super impressive. But it's interesting that the guys that have chosen to, or that are electing to enroll early or have enrolled early at South Carolina, it's like Luke Doty. That's someone that people think might be the new franchise cornerstone, and Marshawn Lloyd, who's obviously going to have a lot of responsibility, hopefully, in South Carolina's offense next year. You look at Muhammad Kaba, a guy that I think people are really excited about as maybe sort of a diamond in the rough, as it were, because he's only, like a 3-star guy, and he's someone that projects a lot of upside given his length and coverage ability at the linebacker position. So the guys that Carolina has gotten in feel like the guys that might be able to make an impact right away, and I don't necessarily think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, you saw when they tweeted out that video that Paul Jackson, the new strength coach, is like, please don't ever do that again.
Yeah.
Wants to sort of, let's avoid those types of injuries. But no, I mean, it really does. Even since he's gotten on campus, there's a lot of excitement about him because he's a tremendous athlete. He looks really good. If he's like 3/4 as good as he looks on film, then then they're going to be in for a treat, I think, there. And on top of that, he's just got his personality is really unique. He's a serious guy about his business. There's no issues with him. During the recruiting process, there were no issues with him. He committed, and that was sort of it. I mean, they didn't have to deal with any drama with him. And this day and age, for a guy like him that had that many schools, those big-name programs coming after him, that's sort of rare. And same thing with Luke. I mean, so they've definitely got some guys that, and I think those three that you hit on, we'll see how Kaba in the spring, how much he can do, from a physical standpoint because of the knee injury last year. It was early last year, but haven't really heard how much he'll do. But certainly, I think you look at Marshawn, he's the number one guy in the class. He's not the only difference maker in the class by any means, because there's some guys in January and there's some summer guys that are going to make an impact. But he's the one that you can really pinpoint of, this is a guy that's going to play a huge role. I think he's got a really good shot to quickly establish himself as the presumed starter.
So it's kind of funny. The football season, I think we can all agree, was pretty much a worst-case scenario. And then since the end of the football season, it's kind of all been good. The Mike Bobo hire, I think people are generally pretty excited about. Paul Jackson as a strength and conditioning coach, for people that have strong opinions about such things. I haven't heard many dissenting opinions therein. The recruiting class went not only as expected in terms of Carolina getting the guys that they thought they were going to get, but you're obviously able to land Jordan Burch as well, which has been tremendous. You get these early enrollees. Everything's been going well. One small piece of bad news, and not even like really bad news, because again, it wasn't unexpected according to y'all. I think some other Gamecock fans are maybe a little bit surprised by it. Really, the only negative thing that's happened since the football season ended is the decommitment of Daquan Stewart, wide receiver out of North Carolina. Y'all weren't surprised by this. Should Carolina fans be worried? Does this signal sort of like the end of his recruitment for South Carolina, or are the Gamecocks still in it?
Yeah, I would look for it to end South Carolina's recruitment as far as this goes. Daquan's a guy that's been committed for, literally a year now, but I think when he did not sign in the early signing period, that should have been the first sign that something was a little bit up here. Obviously, whenever there's a situation where a guy maybe isn't quite where they need to be academically, sometimes they'll ask them to wait and sign and sort of see where things go. And, this day and age, you lose the scholarship. If you sign a guy and he does not qualify, you don't get that counter back, basically. So you have to be very, very careful about that. And, I would look for – I don't know where Daquan's going to look now, like what schools are in it, but I think South Carolina probably will move on. We've talked a ton. In fact, we'll probably give an update a little bit later on in this episode. We've talked a ton about Jakari Caldwell, the receiver at Northwestern. The fact that South Carolina has moved in so quickly on him in the past month or so, I think was a sign that this was coming, and essentially you're looking at him as the guy they're trying to land to replace Daquan Bobo Stewart in this class, I think.
What's interesting is you look at the list of schools that have offered him, it's not like he's passing up South Carolina because he's got necessarily a murderer's row of other offers. And look, South Carolina just went 4-8, so it's not a hot program right now, but it's Akron and UMass and Charlotte and Coastal and Georgia Tech and Liberty, Louisville, Penn State, Syracuse, and West Virginia. I don't think I'm missing anyone. I have the list right in front of me. Those are the schools that have offered him. Do you have any inclination where at this point he might land?
No, I don't know where he's going to end up, like I said, but I think it's more of a situation of almost a mutual split would be maybe the best way to say it, as opposed to him just leaving South Carolina.
So as you mentioned, Jakari Caldwell already kind of slotted as the quote-unquote replacement for Bobo Stewart in this class. What else should Carolina fans be looking at in terms of rounding out the 2020 class come February?
I guess we'll start with Jakari. A little bit more detail on him. I think the thing to watch right there is does Clemson come in and offer? They've started showing a great deal of interest. We reported on this. Tiger Illustrated has reported on this as well. They could offer as soon as next week. They're evaluating, looking. I think it sounds like Clemson wants to add another receiver to their class potentially, and Jakari could be the guy that they focus on, depending on what they decide to do. But they've reached out. They're showing interest. Before that, I would have said he's a borderline lock for South Carolina. Everything I've heard there is that he'll take an official visit later on this month and then probably sign with South Carolina in February. I think Clemson getting involved, if they do offer, throws a little bit of a wrench into that. But I actually, at this point, from everything I've heard, I would sort of characterize it as South Carolina has to be wary of Clemson because of the fact that we all know what they've done right now. We all know what they do on offense. We all know how well they've recruited at that position. But I still think because South Carolina was in a little bit earlier, they have a much better situation to sell as far as playing time, the chance to come right in and play early. Great job by Bobby Bentley building a relationship there so far. I would still, even if Clemson offers, I still think South Carolina is probably the favorite with Jakari Caldwell, and but that will be something to sort of look for moving forward. Is do they move in? Do they get him on campus? And Chris, I think it actually the other side of that is that it speaks to his ability as a player. We've seen him blow up. He went from maybe a couple of smaller offers to having double-digit Power 5 offers in a matter of like a week, maybe a month or so ago. So if Clemson does offer, the fact that they're sniffing around, nobody listening to this podcast really wants us to go into depth about Clemson's receiver recruiting over the last 4 or 5 years, but
it's been good.
But yeah, so the fact that those guys want this guy potentially says a lot about this guy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and part of it, I think part of it is you get a little bit of the domino effect with, South Carolina. They were one of the first, right, or the first to sort of start the party.
They were
right?
one
of
Baylor
the first.
was actually
Baylor,
part of the reason he took the official to Baylor was because they were basically, I believe, the first Power 5 to officially offer. So that got them involved because they. But all these.
So Jakari Caldwell to the Panthers confirmed.
Yeah, and he'd be right down the road.
Yeah, easy.
But yeah, so I think you look at the relationship also that Bobby Bentley had built there before South Carolina even offered. Yeah. What I've heard is paying off here. But yeah, there was a big group of schools there, a bunch of ACCs, Wake Forest, NC State. He was originally committed to ECU, had backed off that, and then just this load of offers came in about, I think, a 48-hour, 72-hour window there.
Yeah, and I mean, he's definitely a guy that, you look at him, and he looks like a high-level guy. You just look at him physically, you look at him on film, he's got the height, the length, he's got ball skills, smooth routes, he can run, and so is he like a 5-star guy? No, I mean, nobody's saying that at this point, but he is someone that, has really seen his stock take off. I think, offensively, we've seen Northwestern put up some huge numbers and produce some really good receivers in the past, and we've heard from folks around there, West can back this up, that, he's got a chance to be a guy who's, up there with him. He's got some bloodlines, in his family. His brother is actually Anthony Johnson, who played at Buffalo, and then ended up as a guy who ended up in the NFL, and he was a tremendous receiver. And so he's got some other family members too that have played ball. So a lot of good things that we've heard about him, and he's someone that once his senior season sort of progressed, South Carolina really liked what they saw and moved in on him, and seems pretty excited about him as other schools are.
So the early signing period saw Carolina ink 19 of 23 available for the 2020 class. Is that right?
17
of 23.
Yeah.
There's 6 more guys. Jakari Caldwell, and who are the other 5?
So then you got Jordan Birch and Alex Huntley.
Right.
So really the breakdown, I'll just do it this way or I'll mess it up. So 17 in December, rather. Then you've got Birch and Huntley to make 19. Okay. Then you've got Matt Oliveira and Nick Muse counting towards that class. That's 21. Okay. And then you've got Collin Hill counting towards that class. That's 22. All right. And
Caldwell makes 23.
And that'd be 23. And so then you got 2 others. So that could be really another running back is going to be one. So the possibility of taking Zaquandre White is on the board. Henry Parrish is still a guy that South Carolina is swinging for at the running back position. We'll have to see how that plays out. Still a bunch of schools recruiting him, some official visits probably in January. Ole Miss, FSU, Florida's in the mix. You still got the 2 specialists on the board. So there's the kicker Mitch Jeter, there's the punter Kai Kroger. Now South Carolina could get creative with those guys and count them forward. If there's a slot available, you could sign one.
If it's available, just go ahead and
sign one of them.
Yeah.
I hope it's Kai, personally, just as we talked about Kai kickers.
Well, I mean, he's going to be a part of. He's going to be in the program regardless.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of, do you do it now or do you push him to where it counts for 2021? Yeah. But I think a running back. I think they're possibly still looking at DBs. It seems like, they hope Caldwell's a receiver. I think adding a receiver is definitely a priority. Maybe another defensive end too. From what we've heard, the Reggie Grimes thing, it seemed like there was some buzz online that South Carolina could potentially flip him. Doesn't really seem like that's the case anymore. I think that's a long shot to happen, or a no shot. At least at this point, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So I'll be curious to see, do they move in on another DB? Do they move in on another defensive end? Is there a best available out there? Sometimes I think with this staff, we've seen it before. If you get down to that final slot, you almost take an NFL draft best available approach. Is there a guy out there that's maybe had a big senior year, maybe decommits from another school? They'll sort of go through, because they can hit the road again here soon. and see if there's a senior guy that they feel like can help the team. But certainly they won't. I think one of these spots, safe to say, one of these spots to a receiver, one of these spots to a running back, and then we'll see what happens with the other one.
So we'll obviously keep you up posted on how South Carolina's finagling the math as we get a little bit closer into February. And with that, I would like to, present a motion. The three of us are going to vote on it for, on behalf of at least all of Gamecock Central, hopefully all the world. So obviously the early signing period has become the thing. You guys have even just taken to calling it signing day. Now, February is the official national signing day. What do you present a motion? Make a motion? Motion to have the February National Signing Day. We're going to call it from now on late signing period. And early signing day, we're just going to call National Signing Day. Y'all cool with that? All in favor?
I'm cool. We already call it
sure.
that. To me, it's
no,
already...
We have to call this one upcoming in February
Signing.
late signing day.
Okay.
All right. So
I might forget, but
we will keep y'all posted.
Is there a penalty for?
Huh? Yeah, you get 40 lashes every time you say it wrong. Eyelashes, though. You just have to keep them in your pocket or something. I just remember that works. Yeah, I know y'all are old men, so y'all don't remember watching SpongeBob growing up. But it was the episode where they're painting Mr. Krabs' house, and basically SpongeBob's like, "Oh, we can't get any paint on the floor," to Patrick, or Mr. Krabs going to give us 40 lashes, like with a whip, like pirate style. And then Patrick has a little thought bubble. He's imagining what it would be like to get 40 lashes, and he just got really, really thick eyelashes. He's going to add 40 eyelashes. It's a better visual joke, and I hate both of you for being old. So shut up.
We could really go down. Well, you already did go down the rabbit hole on that. I could go further, but we won't. And so, yes.
All right, fine. We're going to keep y'all posted on other recruiting things as Carolina rounds out its class as we head into the late signing period. Two other things, and you already alluded to it, and this is kind of a multi-part story, but we'll start with the first part since you already mentioned Collin Hill's name. This is, sort of recruiting adjacent. There's a lot of reasons that it makes sense for former Colorado State quarterback Collin Hill to come back to South Carolina. One, he's a local kid. Two, following his former head coach, Mike Bobo, obviously South Carolina's new offensive coordinator. There's a lot of things that make sense about this. And by the way, if y'all are subscribed to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, you got a notification for a great interview y'all did with Collin Hill. That was last week or 2 weeks ago. And if you didn't, go check it out on GamecockCentral.com or just look at the Gamecock Central Podcast Network feed. The part of this that doesn't make sense is it's already projected to be a crowded quarterback room with Ryan Helinski. He's obviously the presumptive starter. He was starter for almost all of last season. He's coming back healthy by all indications. You have Luke Doty, who people are really, really high on, who could be the face of this team going forward anyway. And you have Daquan Joyner, who is the crowd favorite, who's the backup quarterback for most of last season, who provides a lot of interesting, elements to the offense, at least theoretically, that Helinski doesn't necessarily offer, that Luke Doty, we're not sure. So it's already a crowded quarterback room. How much should Carolina fans read into Collin Hill transferring to South Carolina? Or is it really just about Bobo and being home?
I think it's just about, for all the reasons you laid out, it just makes a lot of sense. You never have too much depth at the quarterback position, as we saw last year. Your starter goes down, then the guy that has to step in is playing banged up, then Daquan Joyner is playing banged up. You never have too many guys there that could potentially help. And I think Collin Hill is a guy that, yes, he adds depth to the room. But I don't think he's going to lay down and just, give up the starting position either. I think he's here to compete. I think he's a mature kid, which at the quarterback position, having those natural leadership skills is a big part of it as well. And, I was impressed with how he carried himself in high school, even more impressed with him now, talking to him. I think it just made sense. Anytime you can bolster your quarterback room, you should do it. And it also... It lets Luke Doty come in and progress at the rate that is best for him, as opposed to progress at the rate that is best maybe for the team. Or let's be frank, sometimes when freshman quarterbacks are playing, a lot of the time it's because they're being forced into action as opposed to them being truly, completely ready. So, I think this is good for Ryan Helinski. I think this is good for the quarterback room. I think it's good for Collin Hill. From when we were talking, his parents and family having to get all the way out to Colorado to see him play. Being right down the interstate from where he grew up there as a Dorman grad. His sister went to South Carolina. Obviously, I think it speaks a bit to Mike Bobo as well. as far as him wanting to follow his coach, I think speaks to his comfort level and his trust in Bobo as not just a person, but also, as a coach and a play caller and a developer and all those things. So to me, it just made, I know some people sort of like, wait, what? But to me, this made complete sense on like every single, direction you could look at it.
So the other part of that story is when people heard the news that Collin Hill was transferring to South Carolina, they thought, okay, we kind of thought Daquan Joyner was going to transfer. This must mean he's absolutely going to transfer. And this wasn't even like a media like drummed up storyline about Joyner transferring. This is seriously just like people on Twitter and message boards that for some reason thought it was going to happen. And Daquan Joyner yesterday, we're recording this Wednesday morning, I think it was yesterday afternoon or maybe Monday afternoon, he put this thing out on Twitter, this great video, a whole thing about, sticking with what you started, not quitting, not giving up, he's not going to transfer, whatever. And people were like, oh, thank goodness. But the whole Daquan Joyner transfer story has been so interesting to me because, one, there was never any indication from anyone inside or even close to the football program that thought Daquan Joyner was going to transfer. And secondly, I wasn't surprised because last season he didn't win the backup quarterback job. He said, I'm not going to transfer. I stick with what I started. Last year during the regular season, it was like, okay, well, same thing. I'm not going to quit. I'm going to stick with what I started. He says that again, and now all of a sudden people feel a lot better. I didn't expect him to transfer anyway because we know what kind of kid he is. He has reiterated his stance time and again. I don't know why people needed this third or fourth or whatever affirmation that Joyner was going to stick with the program. I mean, I guess it's good news because you have another playmaker, and then the questions arise of what it actually is his role next year, because whether it's in the quarterback room is probably maybe the second string quarterback, maybe the third string quarterback, maybe even the fourth string quarterback with Collin Hill coming in. Is he going to embrace a more full-time switch to wide receiver, where South Carolina could definitely use athleticism and playmaking potential? But more than anything, like I said, I was surprised that people felt like this was such a big story. I would have been very surprised if he had transferred.
Well, I think just this day and age, if you're a quarterback and you don't win the job, you transfer out. And, there's certainly been some rumblings that Daquan was considering that as an option. I think safe to say.
Yeah, safe to say. I mean, there was. It's not as if it was never in question. I wouldn't.
Yeah, so that was out there. I get it. I'm not surprised that he's staying. I wouldn't have been surprised if it was the other side either. I think it's refreshing. Again, I mean, we said it when he stayed preseason. I think him staying preseason was obviously refreshing, but that was right before the year was about to start, and he stuck with his team. But I don't think anybody would have blamed him, because this is what quarterbacks do. Quarterbacks transfer out. If he had waited to the end of the year, the semester's about to start at USC, and said, look, I gave it my best shot. I want to play quarterback. I signed to play quarterback, not quarterback and receiver, and I'm going to go do that. I don't think there's any way you could place any blame on him for doing that.
No, and I'm not saying I would have. I'm just saying he said so many times, and he just seems like the kind of guy that would stick with it, that I would have been surprised. Do you not feel the same way? I know I take a lot of flack for being hard on Joyner for his, part of it's lack of opportunities, but ultimate lack of productivity on the field. But, you never doubt his character, and he seems like someone that really likes South Carolina, that really, likes Will Muschamp, that likes the coaching staff, and that seems committed to finishing whatever it is that he started.
But I don't think it would be a lack of character if he left to go somewhere he could play. I mean, that's what quarterbacks do.
It's what guys at a lot of positions do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean? But, in quarterback, for the most part, you look at other positions. You play 5 offensive linemen. You start 5 offensive linemen. You start 3 receivers most places. You rotate 2 running backs. You play 4 defensive ends. You play 4 defensive tackles. If you're talking about the guys you're rotating in. Quarterback, for the most part, there's a guy. And then there's a backup. But normally the backup is either an older guy who's just stuck around, or a young guy who one day wants to be the guy. So quarterback is such a unique position. It's recruited differently than every other position. It's handled differently than every other position. And guys transfer, I feel like, at a higher rate than any other position. So I don't think it would be an issue of character whether he transfers or not. I just think at some point guys want to play. So I'm never surprised when a quarterback transfers out.
No, and I should be clear. I'm not saying that it represents low character if you do that, because I support players transferring and freedom of player movement and things like that. But I just think it takes someone of like exceptionally high. Like I don't think Jalen Hurts is low character. I don't think Justin Fields is low character. Yeah. They all have the reasons and it makes sense, but I think it just takes someone of exceptionally high character to accept a less than stellar position, in the interest of helping the team, like the being part of something greater than yourself.
Yeah, and agree. And he had, you got to remember he's had people in his ear. All these players have people in their ear, but when Ryan Helinski won, remember back in the spring when they sort of unexpectedly, or after spring, Ryan's the backup quarterback going into the season.
That was going into
preseason.
Yeah,
right.
That was after
spring.
After fall camp.
After fall camp. Yeah. After fall camp, when they came out and said that, and it was sort of unexpected. We didn't know if they'd sort of leave it open ended. DeCarrion had people in his ear saying leave. And you remember, he took one day off practice. So that was a difficult thing to swallow. And then you listen to this different feedback and you think about it. So, and then, throughout the year and then as last year progressed, as the season played out on the field. So there are different things that go into considering it. But yeah, I mean, I agree. He's a different type of guy. Some of the things that he's gone through, and the way that he goes about his business is sort of unique. And so I think it says a lot about him to do that. Nobody would fault him if he did leave.
I think the next question and the most interesting thing now is the same thing we talked about all season long until he was sort of slowed and hampered, is how does he get used at this point? Mm-hmm. Is quarterback still on the table? Is this spring going to be more used to sort of come along at receiver? Is he sort of a multi-tool guy? Watching Taysom Hill for the Saints this week. Not that they're similar players, because Hill is a much bigger and more physical type of player, but just seeing an NFL team, which the NFL used to be so like by the book about this guy has to be used this way. This guy's a wide receiver. This guy's a quarterback. Seeing a team be creative with a guy like that and get him the ball in different ways and get him on the field in different ways. He's like the first guy down there on special teams as well.
Could they use him like Florida used to use Percy Harvin, or like we saw Kentucky use Lynn Bowden this year? Maybe not to the extent that, because obviously at the end of the season, Lynn Bowden was just playing quarterback. But that kind of guy,
which is still crazy.
Where, he's playing receiver, but he's, taking some wildcat snaps, and you're, running some reverses with him and some fake reverses and just getting him involved on motion and window dressing. Like, I think there are a lot of interesting options there. And we talked about this a little bit, and we'll talk about it more as we get closer to spring practice and obviously next season. But right now, this Carolina roster is pretty much bereft any sort of proven perimeter playmaking talent. Like, Shi Smith is the best guy, and he just had a very, very lackluster season. You need all the help you can get. You need all hands on deck. And I think Daquan Joyner, maybe the one thing that you look at in terms of this announcement that he made on Twitter, in terms of him doubling down on just being committed to the team, is a little more willingness. Because, last year he still wanted to be the quarterback, and he was, and it's good that he stayed there, because obviously by the end of the season, Carolina needed it, and it's unfortunate that he weren't healthy, because that maybe would have made a difference down the stretch in a couple of these games to have an actual healthy backup quarterback, as Ryan Helinski was dealing with the things that he was dealing with. But if he does feel comfortable making that full-time switch, it's all hands on deck at this point, and he's someone that I think could help.
Yeah, for sure. Athletically, and I think he even showed some flashes last year. Now, it's important to keep in mind, he did have to go back. His development was hampered because he had to go back to quarterback at times, because he either was the backup, or they needed to keep him in the room because of the lack of depth. You didn't have Jake Bentley. You had a freshman in Ryan Helinski, who was also then banged up, and Jay Urich had spent time at wide receiver. He had pretty much made a full-time switch. And then Joyner also got hurt. He missed some time. He was limited. The Georgia game where he came in and was basically he was the third string guy at that point, second string since Bentley was out. And came in and was not 100% in that game and helped him win the game. So, but he showed, that whatever position he's at, he has not had a ton of opportunities yet. That's for sure. And so, he's shown that he has ability. I think even at receiver, he showed some natural ability to do that. He's just a good athlete. So I'm really intrigued by it. Just, they weren't able to fully, I guess, unleash, you could say, how they want to use him, because he wasn't fully healthy. And then they just had a lot of different circumstances offensively last year, whether it's not being very good or having a bunch of injuries or having to shuffle the quarterback room, that really prevented that from happening. So if they can put some more of those factors into place this year, then maybe they can not only have a clear plan but execute it.
Is there a scenario where South Carolina lines up against Coastal Carolina, season opener, and Daquan Joyner is your starter at slot?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think probably after he returns the opening kickoff too.
Well, and as much as I think Shi Smith has been a good slot receiver for South Carolina, the fact that they have not been able to sort of have that deep threat on the outside to help stretch the field, if Daquan Joyner ends up able to sort of buy in, and I shouldn't say buy in, but develop at receiver and show that he can be a consistent threat, then maybe that does open the door to move Shi Smith to the outside. That's something they talked about all this past off season, but he ended up back in the slot anyway.
Which I think is where he's more comfortable, right? And you hope that XL can take that outside spot so you can allow Shi to play back inside. Like, isn't that the best case scenario for this team, though, in terms of maximizing a guy's skill set?
What do you mean?
Having Shi play inside, and I feel like that's why he keeps ending up there, right?
I mean, maybe. I think they've lacked guys on the outside that are downfield threats. Now, maybe Leggett can be that, but we'll see. And you got to have two outside guys because they're going to be in three wide a lot. Ortre Smith's another. Ideally, maybe Ortre gets back 100% and he's outside. Legett's outside and Shi is inside. But I think Debo was an outside player a lot of his career at South Carolina, and he brought you a deep threat, and I think that's something they need. So, and maybe playing Shi both ways, playing him in the slot and outside, is something that we see more of this coming year. But certainly, to me, there's a lot of questions at the receiver position, and if Daquan Joyner could show that he's ready to be a starter, an SEC caliber starter, that helps solidify some things offensively. And I don't know that he necessarily can. That's a big ask. We always talk about an athletic quarterback and be like, oh, that guy should move to receiver like it's easy, when it's not easy. There's so much that goes into that position.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention you look at the other receivers that he's going up against, just this year, for example, you have the four guys at Alabama and the couple of guys from LSU and, Lynn Bowden at Kentucky and the couple of guys at Florida. And it's like these are guys that are amazing receivers and have probably mostly, I don't know, maybe some of them played quarterback in high school, but most of these guys have been playing wide receiver their whole life and wide receivers their entire college career. So it's never as easy as just plug an athletic guy in and he's going to be a great receiver. You got to work on your route tree. You got to work on, a whole bunch of different things that we don't even necessarily think about. But for Carolina, you don't have really a lot of other options. Yeah,
no, you're right. And we'll see. That, to me, that position is probably one of my, and we'll have all offseason to talk about it, all spring and talk about it. That's one of my biggest question marks, I think, going into next year is what do they do at the receiver spot.
Yeah, spring ball starts February 26th. We will obviously have a lot more leading up to spring practice, and then hopefully we'll get some idea. I don't know how much they'll give away, how much we'll actually be able to glean from spring practice in terms of where Daquan Joyner will fit into this year's offense, but hopefully the picture will start to become a little bit clearer. The one thing that remains to be seen, at this point, I don't think Daquan Joyner projects to be one of the guys that would finish in the all-decade team for the 2020s. Maybe if this move to wide receiver pans out, he could certainly be in that discussion. But as we exit the teens, Wes, you and Chris and everyone else at Gamecock Central, I know Colin worked on it. I don't know who else was involved in this collaboration. Worked a lot, and I weighed in a little bit here and there, not in any official capacity, on the South Carolina football team of the decade, the best decade in the history of South Carolina football, which I think might make some Carolina fans sad because you finished the decade going 4-8. But regardless, it was a very successful decade, a lot of great players, a lot of guys in the NFL, a lot of record-breaking performances over the course of the entire decade. You want to just give it to me straight up? Or are we going to make people go read it and we'll just discuss some of the controversial picks?
It doesn't matter. Are we giving the Gamecock Central one or our personal ones?
Let's give the Gamecock Central one, and we can talk about where we would disagree.
All right, Gamecock Central, real quick.
Now, this was consensus opinion amongst all the staff writers, right?
I wouldn't say consensus.
Well, not yet, but
we voted.
It was a collaboration. Yeah.
Although I don't think Chris sent his in. Did you?
No, I have mine in my head.
Oh, okay, sweet. All right, quarterback Connor Shaw, running back Marcus Lattimore, receivers Alshon Farrow, Brian Edwards.
Wow.
Offensive line, A.J. Cann, Corey Robinson, Brandon Shell, Donnell Stanley. That doesn't include center, which was T.J. Johnson. Defensive ends, Clowney and Melvin Ingram. Defensive tackles, Javon Kinlaw and Taylor Stallworth. Linebackers, Shaq Wilson, Sky Moore, T.J. Brunson. Corners, Stephon Gilmore, Victor Hampton. Safeties, DJ Swearinger, Antonio Allen. Kickers and punters, Elliott Fry, Joe Charlton. Punt and kick returners, Ace Sanders and Deebo Samuel. Coach of the decade, Stephen Orr Spurrier. Offensive player of the decade, a tie, Marcus Lattimore, Alshon Jeffrey. Defensive player of the decade, no surprise, Davian Clowney. Special teams player of the decade, Deebo Samuel. And freshman of the decade, Marcus Lattimore.
Damn, son. All right, so my first reaction when you read that off, and I was actually having this conversation with somebody over the break, and hearing that list kind of confirms my suspicion. It's really unfortunate. Obviously, we know that it was kind of tough luck with Carolina having those 3 straight 11-win seasons, not making a BCS Bowl or anything like that, but you put that all-decade team against every other all-decade team in the SEC, that's pretty competitive.
Yeah,
it's not the best,
but you're battling.
That is a damn good team.
You're in the conversation. I just realized there's no tight end.
Wow.
How's there no tight end?
No tight end. That'd be a tough one, too, to come up with some guys.
I know, you're going 5 wide.
We'll do tight end.
All right, so here...
there's been a lot of good tight ends, too.
So
I'm partial to Busta. When did Jared Cook graduate? Was he the aughts or was he teens?
No, he wouldn't have been this decade.
Yeah, he wouldn't.
He was last decade. Oh, man, because he's still killing it for the Saints.
So mine was similar, but I created an all-purpose player just because I can do
because
what
you had
I
to
want.
put Deebo in there.
Exactly, and Colin didn't listen, so...
Yeah. Well, and I was with you, by the way. I remember we were having this conversation over text where you were like, how do I leave one of these 4 guys out between Alshon, Brian, Deebo, and Pharaoh? And I said, got to leave Deebo out, make him the all-purpose guy, because if you look at it, I mean, he had a really nice career at South Carolina, but he only had one really, really good season as a wide receiver. Part of that was because, injuries slowed him up and things like that, but, over the, bodies of work, individual seasons, I feel like Deebo does have to be the odd man out there.
Yeah, and then, if you're talking body of work. Now, if you're talking about those 4 receivers, what order would you pick? If you were picking a South Carolina team, I'm picking Alshon first and Deebo second out of those 4.
Really? I would say
I'm building a team.
Oh, man. Definitely Alshon first. Chris, do you agree Alshon first?
Yeah. You got it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would honestly, I'd maybe go Brian, too.
Really?
He is the paradigm of consistency. Hey, what do you mean? How do you make that face? He caught a pass in every single game he played in.
He also probably dropped more passes than any of those other guys. I don't think Alshon dropped a ball. I mean, he maybe dropped one ball his entire career.
We need to effort this because I feel like Brian's drop numbers have gotten blown a little bit out of proportion. He had like one bad stretch in the middle of his junior season last year, not this past season, but the season before that. And then I don't know, he dropped a couple of balls this year, but
no, I'm not saying that he dropped a lot of passes.
We're
talking about relative to the best South Carolina receivers in the last decade, and this is a group right here.
Yeah,
like Alshon freaking Jeffrey is one of the best receivers in the NFL.
Sure. That's why I wouldn't pick anyone over Alshon.
Yeah, so Alshon won. Deebo's playmaking ability, the fact that he could score anytime he touched it, and that's literally nothing against Brian Evers or against Pharaoh Cooper. Just if I was selecting now, body of work, Brian Evers is the all-time leading receiver at South Carolina.
Again, consistency.
So
and not to mention, he made the greatest catch that any South Carolina receiver has ever made in the history of the school's football program.
What, the Tennessee catch?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
That
pretty
was
good.
a good one.
It was pretty good.
I don't know.
The Ole Miss catch was really good, too.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. He's fantastic. Not to mention, I mean, obviously, he's still not the same level playmaker as Deebo ever, but we saw, I mean, really in the last year and a half, the little bit of action that he got as a punt returner, and then his entire senior season, every time he got the ball, he was channeling the energy of Deebo, where he was just running over dudes, breaking tackles. He was great in space his senior year. I think, I don't know. I feel like it's sort of tied in with team success, which is the same reason that I think people don't think as highly of Pharaoh as some of those other guys. But I feel like Brian will still be an underrated guy over the course of history, just because his teams didn't succeed that much. But he was fantastic for his entire career, and there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, you're right. And we're splitting hairs if we're talking about these 4 guys. But I just created the all-purpose player, even though Colin didn't listen. But yeah, tight end. I have Hayden Hearst. If you look at the numbers, Hayden's numbers, as good as, y'all's instant reaction was, wow, there were some good guys. And there were. If you look at the numbers, Hayden Hearst destroys the other tight ends.
So other tight ends this decade, it's Rory Anderson, it's Hayden Hearst, it's obviously Kyle Markway. Who else?
Darrell Adams.
Darrell Adams.
Darrell was a good player.
Yeah, wait, he had that touchdown against LSU that set up the onside kick.
When did Justice Cunningham finish up?
He was before Jared Cook, I thought, right?
No, he was after.
He would have been this.
Wow, Jared Cook's that old?
Jared Cook,
it was Jared Cook and then Justice Cunningham.
Jared Cook, I believe, was in the 2005 recruiting class, if I'm not mistaken. You remember Jared Cook playing in the 06 Auburn
7, 8,
game?
9? Yeah.
We all remember that.
That's the play that, unfortunately for him, sticks out for everybody, was the dropped touchdown when Savell looked off the safety and threw a dime.
Against Will Muschamp's Auburn defense.
Yeah.
Down
the middle.
I'm fine with Hayden. I would just make sure that Rory got honorable mention because he was great. Or he was fun.
He was fun.
Maybe not great, but he was really good.
The numbers just don't. The numbers don't match Hayden's at all. Which I was actually surprised how different they were. I'm trying to get those since, it's really interesting. You have in your mind, especially the longer you get away from when a guy played, you have in your mind what they did, and sometimes you go back and the numbers back you up, and then sometimes you go back and you're like, wow, that guy did way more than I remember, or that guy did way less. But Hayden Hearst for a tight end, this guy had 100 career receptions, almost 1,300 yards, 3 touchdowns, had 11 rushes. Y'all remember when they wanted to get him the ball in the jet sweep?
I hated that every time they did it, even when it worked.
Yeah, even when it worked. He had a rushing touchdown. But, yeah, so he had a year, 2016, 48 catches, 2017, 44 catches from the tight end position. That's pretty crazy.
Busta Anderson, for comparison,
61
catches, 954 yards. But he did have 9 touchdowns. I remember him being a touchdown scoring machine. He had 5 in 2012. I think about the one touchdown that he scored on that. I don't know what you call it, but basically he ran like all the way across the field and was wide open against Georgia, and Shaw hit him in stride. Yeah.
Throwback. Seemed like he had a nice touchdown catch against Georgia from Dylan Thompson as well, down the middle of the field. But yeah, he would be in the conversation. Let's see. For me, I had my offensive linemen were Brandon Shell, A.J. Cann, Donnell Stanley, Corey Robinson, and T.J. Johnson. Is that the same?
I would have a couple to add there.
Maybe Dennis Daly over Corey Robinson.
Dennis Daly would be one. Rakevius Watkins was really good.
Yeah,
he was really good.
Who do you replace?
Oh, I'm not saying. I was hedging. I wasn't even saying he would. I would just throw him in the mix.
Is Zach Bailey in there potentially?
He could be in the conversation. I wouldn't put him on the first team over anybody else. Who else was center aside from TJ this decade?
Well, TJ and Donnell pretty much played the entire decade.
TJ was like Joe Morrison
and Donnell was 3.5.
Did Ronald Patrick play center part of that time? Or I know he played guard at one point. A.J. Cann played center at one point. But yeah, I went back and forth on Corey Robinson and Dennis Daly. Ultimately, I even went back and looked at some Pro Football Focus grades for the two of them, and Corey's were a good bit better.
Really, Dennis Daly though, it's like I guess not last year, but year before, he was a fantastic left tackle and had one bad game against Kentucky when Josh Allen ate his lunch and had like 3 sacks against him or something like that, and that destroyed his number for the entire rest of the season. But other than that, I mean, he's starting for the Panthers by the end of the year. Not that the Panthers were any good, but
yeah,
it's just, I mean,
you still have to be good to start for an NFL team,
exactly.
For the most part.
Yeah, as a rookie, protecting the quarterback's blind side, like that's pretty strong.
Josh Allen ate a lot of people's lunch.
That's why he was a top 10 pick. What, he was 6 or something, or 4?
Stud. But so to finish mine off, I categorized them a little bit differently to fit the guys I wanted to on here. I put Melvin Ingram as a defensive tackle just because he was so good lining up inside as a pass rusher.
So who's your other end?
So I had Kinlaw and Ingram as my 2 defensive tackles. I've got Clowney and Devin Taylor. I thought Devin was always underrated.
Yeah, he had a pick 6.
I put Antonio Allen as a spur, or as a linebacker because he played spur. So I had Sky, Antonio Allen, T.J. Brunson. And I actually, even though you could have put Holloman at linebacker as well, Holloman played more of his career at safety, so I had DJ Swearinger, Devontae Holloman at safety. The two corners, Stephon Gilmore, Vic Hampton, I struggle to know who I should put as the second corner. But the people
You put Vic Hampton over just the first 2 years of JC?
Yes.
Okay.
The people who played with Vic Hampton say that he was the best cover guy, like pure cover guy.
Really?
That Carolina has had like in recent memory. Like
Really?
when he was in school, the way he would just lock guys down for the people that were like on the field with him, they're very high on Vic Hampton. So that was sort of what put him over the top for me. Elliott Fry, Joseph Charlton, Ace Sanders, punt returner, Deebo Samuel, kick returner, coach of the decade, Steve Spurrier. Offensive player of the decade, I went Lattimore. Defensive Clowney, freshman Marcus. Special teams, Deebo Samuel. That was my personal final list.
So no Mike Davis over Marcus Lattimore? Is that crazy?
Yeah, I can't do it.
Yeah.
No.
He meant, and you almost, I guess we can take this up with Colin. You needed to just let us put two running backs because any all-decade team, Mike Davis should be on there, but Mike Davis can't be on there at the, by taking Marcus Lattimore off. So,
we need more than 11 guys because you need more than 3 wide receivers. You need a tight end and you need 2 running backs.
15-man offense.
Yeah.
And a 6 O-lineman. Extra blocker.
But yeah, I mean, I had some conversations, like, what other guys do you mix in? We ended up having Taylor Stallworth as the defensive tackle. How do you sort of slot different guys? But that was my official, unofficial all-decade team.
No Jimmy Legree at DB.
No Jimmy Legree. No Rashad Fenton?
No.
What would Rashad Fenton have been in your next 2 receiving votes with J.C. Horn? Vic Hampton, Stephon, J.C., and Rashad?
Maybe. I'm trying to... Who else played corner back then? Legree was solid.
Yeah, there was like a...
Yeah, he was solid.
There was... what was his name? Marty Marquette, right?
Yeah, class of... He's York.
I'm just
Conference
pulling
high
names
school.
now.
Yeah.
Carlos Thomas was a cornerback.
That would
at
not
some
have
point?
been this decade.
Was that
Played
last
some
decade?
receiver as a freshman. Yeah, not this decade.
That was 2005 class.
What was his name? Jamarcus King? Now I'm just coming up with names.
He was
of
solid.
people that played defensive back.
I think you're coming up with some solid ones that...
No, I mean, I'm not nominating any
that,
of these. I'm just trying to think of who played corner. I
Yeah.
don't think any of those guys would deserve it. But wasn't Marty Marquette a walk-on? Wasn't he a track guy?
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, I remember him being good, like, considering that he was a walk-on and a track guy.
He started, I'm pretty sure he started 2010 in the Swamp when they clinched the SEC East. The starting cornerbacks were Stephon Gilmore
and Marty Marquette?
and Marty Marquette.
Huh.
If at one point I zoned out and y'all mentioned this, I'm sorry. Why is Patrick DeMarco not on the list?
Oh, all right. So we need a tight end. We need 4 wide
We have to
receivers,
put
2
a
running
fullback.
backs, and a fullback.
Yeah.
6
Yeah.
offensive linemen.
Pat DeMarco's got to be on the list.
Yeah. No, he's awesome. That's a good point.
Talking about the Swamp, that made me think of it. Those blocks he would throw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What years was he?
I don't know. He was definitely on the
there in
2010 team.
2010.
Yeah, was he
So,
7 to 11? Or
I think he was 7 to
10?
11. Sounds
Or 7
about
to
right.
11
to
did he
10.
redshirt?
7 to 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
7,
Yeah,
8,
because he
9,
played
10.
as a freshman.
Yeah.
He counts. He got 1
Wow.
year in on the decade.
Yeah, that's the other part of it. Well, I like
You could put him as a tight end
You could.
because he played tight end and fullback.
I like what you said when you put Donnell Stanley in there because you said it's the all-decade team and he's the only guy that played all-decade.
Exactly. You have to have
Played the whole decade.
You cannot have an all-decade team without Donnell. Sorry, and he feeds the team fish. I mean, he fishes. Then
Donnell's made 3, the only player to make 3 all-decade teams in college football history. Congratulations.
Oh man! So that was a lot of fun. If y'all
he's
missed
going to
that,
find a way to come back next year. Y'all
hope so.
wait.
I hope so. First, got to
It's
play
gonna be
7
He'll
years
wear a
of college
mask.
football.
Some obscure rule.
Just a fake mustache. If y'all missed that, go check it out on Gamecock Central. Weigh in on the thread when we post this. Hit us on Twitter at GC Chris Clark, at West Mitchell GC, and at Pearson Fowler if you think we missed anybody or think that we were dead wrong about anything. But that was a lot of fun.
We're idiots.
I'm glad that y'all did that. Thanks for letting me weigh in on it a little bit, Wes. When we do the basketball one, we'll talk to Colin Taylor tomorrow a little bit about that. We're obviously going to be recapping the Florida game, looking ahead to Tennessee, and we'll have a little bit of fun with the basketball version of that just so we touch a little bit more of this because it's really good content, and it was a really good decade for all South Carolina sports. Thank you all so much for listening. Glad to be back here on ACP. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with your friends. We will be back next Wednesday. And, it's weird. Like football season's over, but National Signing Day, late signing period is right around the corner. And then spring starts not long after that. And then we do have a little bit of a doldrums, but there's a lot going on still. So be sure to subscribe. A lot of good stuff going. Colin and I are rolling with the hard foul now twice a week, which we've had a lot of fun with. And like I said, we appreciate y'all's feedback any way you want to give it to us. So please let us know. Y'all, thank you so much for listening. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for being with us through the start of this and rocky early starts in 2019. And now I feel like we got a good, consistent thing going. So we really appreciate it. Wouldn't have been possible without all of y'all's support and feedback and, of course, rating, reviewing, and subscribing. Thank you all so much for listening. I will be back with Colin tomorrow. Chris, and I will be back next Wednesday. Y'all have a good week.